Good afternoon to you all. Welcome to this presentation to the Forum for Inspired Learners, entitled Using Science to Test Philosophical Beliefs of a Good Life. My name is George Ndemo. This reflection was prompted by a question encountered on social media. Is it possible to use science to test philosophical beliefs about the good life as portrayed in Aristotelian ethics when contrasted with the ethics of the Cyrenaics, Epicureans, or Bentham's utilitarianism? Several answers were provided, some affirming the question, others rejecting the possibility of using science to test philosophical beliefs. I decided to make a reflection of my own, and this is what I would like to share. We are aware that we live in an era where the prevailing relationship between philosophy and science is such that science is perceived as the direct study of reality itself. Sciences delve into subjects like matter, life, or the mind, forming factual knowledge in these domains. Philosophy, in this view, takes these established facts as a starting point, seeking to surpass them by uncovering their underlying causes or pushing the boundaries of the original scientific inquiries. With these facts in hand, philosophers assess the limitations of human cognition or attempt to establish a metaphysical framework. However, the primary focus of philosophy is not on the content of knowledge itself. Instead, it operates at a more abstract and general level, distilling insights from the wealth of scientific data. Contrary to this view, there is a realization that the sciences do not merely provide philosophy with straightforward and isolated facts. Instead, these facts inherently presuppose a particular kind of metaphysical framework. Moreover, any criticism of these established facts must operate within the confines set by these facts. In essence, philosophy finds itself unable to offer a genuine epistemology or metaphysics, as the tasks typically assigned to philosophers are effectively completed even before they begin their work. Consequently, the philosopher's role becomes one of making pre-existing principles more explicit and precise. This perspective encapsulates Bergson's view on the state of philosophy of science in his time and serves as the rationale behind his abandonment of his initial interest in this domain. It now raises the question of whether the idea that philosophy could advance scientific knowledge further is sustainable. Scholars have scrutinized the notion that philosophy's role is to synthesize and amalgamate the knowledge derived from science with the aim of achieving universal understanding. Bergson, for instance, is not only concerned with the restricted role of the philosopher but goes further to assert that this perspective diminishes the value of science and render philosophy an unreliable discipline. If science can reasonably generalize and pursue its inquiries, what remains for philosophy within this role is essentially pure speculation. Bergson argues that these perspectives are misguided for separating philosophy from concrete facts and elevating it above the sciences, relegating it to the role of a mere court of cassation, that is, annulment or cancellation, concerned only with the laws and their correct application without any influence on how things actually are. The phrase court of cassation refers to a high court that has the power to annul or overturn lower court decisions if they are deemed incorrect or unlawful. In the context of Bergson's argument, when he refers to philosophy as a court of cassation, he means that philosophy in this narrow view would simply be a final authority that reviews and judges the validity of scientific laws and principles without having any real influence over the concrete nature of reality or how things actually are. Its role focused only on applying and interpreting established rules rather than contributing new insights or engaging with the world as science does. It is within this context that I wish to explore how scientific knowledge on belief in good life collaborates with the philosophy's belief in good life and how it can be integrated into a philosopher's belief. This reflection builds upon extensive research on the ways science is utilized, critiqued, and presented in relation to various scientific theories that challenge philosophical beliefs on the good life. I adopt a methodological approach that investigates the significance of science within Bergson's philosophical framework. This exploration is informed by studies in philosophy and empirical social sciences, particularly ethics or moral philosophy, philosophy of science, meta-ethics, and in science, psychology, sociology, economics, and neuroscience. Within this reflection, I wish to address several central research questions. What is the role of scientific knowledge in shaping philosophical beliefs on the good life? How do philosophers utilize scientific knowledge? Are the scientific facts on the good life taken as given, or does philosophy contribute to shaping these facts? Armed with these differing studies, I have sought to contribute my own perspective in this reflection by first contextualizing the question within the two disciplines of philosophy and science. I then analyze and evaluate how both disciplines approach the understanding of what constitutes a good life. Furthermore, I frame the question within a broader inquiry. Can science do without philosophy? and can philosophy do without science? This broader question underscores the fact that the relationship between science and philosophy is part of a long-standing debate, one that has been central to the history of thought. So I want to begin with the contextual background. To contextualize the question of whether scientific methods can test philosophical beliefs about the good life, particularly when contrasting Aristotelian ethics with the Cyrenaic, Epicurean, and utilitarian views, we need to explore the relevant areas in both philosophy and science that provide the background or the backdrop to this inquiry. The question of testing philosophical beliefs about the good life, particularly Aristotelian ethics, Cyrenaic and Epicurean hedonism, and utilitarianism, brings together discussions in normative ethics, metaethics, philosophy of science, and empirical social sciences, like psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics, and sociology. The presupposition is that well-being, or happiness, or pleasure, and virtue are measurable in ways that can help us evaluate different ethical systems. However, this is complicated by the complexities of human experience, the difficulty of quantifying subjective experiences, and the ongoing debates about the relationship between moral theories and empirical facts. So we begin with the philosophical context. In philosophy, the concept of the good life has been debated for centuries, with various schools of thought offering different perspectives on what constitutes a meaningful and fulfilling life. It is important to begin our investigation with the key areas of philosophy that are relevant to these questions. And these include ethics or moral philosophy, philosophy of science, and meta-ethics. Let's begin with ethics or moral philosophy. The relevant discipline in ethics that relates to this question is normative ethics. This is the area of ethics concerned with determining what we ought to do and what constitutes a good or a moral life. The theories in question, Aristotelian ethics, Cyrenaic ethics, Epicureanism, and utilitarianism, each propose different answers to the question of the good life. Aristotelian ethics or virtue ethics. According to Aristotle, the good life is one of eudaimonia, a flourishing achieved through the cultivation of virtue and living in accordance with reason. The focus is on personal growth, rationality, and moral development. The ultimate good is not pleasure, but the realization of human potential. From a scientific perspective, this approach is often critiqued for its lack of empirical evidence regarding virtue and flourishing. However, some modern psychological studies support the idea that living virtuously contributes to well-being. When we come to the Cyrenaic and Epicurean ethics, and their theory of hedonism, we note that both of these schools argue that the good life is about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, though their views diverge. The Cyrenaic ethics founded by Aristippus argues that the good life is found in immediate physical pleasure and sensory enjoyment. It advocates hedonism, focusing on maximizing short-term pleasure. Scientifically, this view may align with the findings in psychology that suggest pleasure and satisfaction can lead to positive emotional states, though long-term hedonism is often linked to negative consequences such as addiction or lack of fulfillment. Epicurean ethics, as advocated by Epicurus, argues that the good life is achieved through the pursuit of simple pleasures, friendship, and the absence of pain, which they call in Greek ataraxia. Unlike Cyrenaic hedonism, Epicureanism values intellectual and tranquil pleasures over physical ones. While modern science often supports the value of calm and health relationships for mental well-being, it may critique Epicureanism for potentially underestimating the importance of certain social and intellectual challenges that can lead to personal growth. Utilitarianism, also known as consequentialism, founded by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, posits that the good life is one in which actions maximize happiness or utility for the greatest number of people. This theory aligns with the scientific approaches in social psychology and economics, which often measure well-being in terms of aggregate happiness. However, critics argue that utilitarianism can justify harmful actions for the greater good and may oversimplify the complexities of moral decision-making. In summary, these ethical systems provide differing answers to the good life. Aristotelian ethics emphasizes virtuous balance. Cyrenaic ethics focuses on immediate pleasure. Epicureanism advocates for tranquility and simple pleasures, and utilitarianism aims for the greatest overall happiness. From a philosophical scientific perspective, each theory has strengths and weaknesses, with empirical studies offering support for some aspects like well-being through relationships or the pursuit of balance, but also highlighting potential limitations or complications in their practical application. Now, I want us to turn to philosophy of science, a second discipline in philosophy that helps us answer questions related to the concept of the good life is the philosophy of science. This branch of philosophy examines the nature of scientific knowledge and inquiry, focusing on the foundations, methods, and the implications of science. In relation to the good life, the philosophy of science explores whether ethical theories can be empirically validated using scientific methods. Can subjective concepts like happiness, flourishing, or virtue be reduced to measure variables that science can observe? Addressing this question involves discussions on empiricism, scientific realism, and measurement in ethics. And I wish to say a point on each of them. Empiricism is a philosophical theory that emphasizes knowledge coming from sensory experience and observation. It asserts that all concepts and knowledge are ultimately derived from experience rather than from innate ideas or reasoning alone. In other words, we learn about the world through our senses: sight, hearing, touch, etc. And this forms the basis of our understanding. Empiricists argue that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. In this case, scientific studies of well-being, pleasure, and happiness could potentially provide insights into what constitutes a good life. Reductionism, on the other hand, is a philosophical approach that seeks to explain complex phenomena by breaking them down into their simpler, more fundamental components. It asserts that systems and their behaviors can be fully understood by examining their parts, and that higher level properties or phenomena can be explained in terms of more basic ones. In ethics, reductionism refers to the idea that complex ethical issues can be understood by breaking them into simpler, more basic components. It suggests that moral principles and values can be reduced to underlying factors such as psychological, biological, or social influences. This approach often seeks to explain ethical behavior from more fundamental, often scientific perspectives, rather than viewing it as a complex, independent aspect of human life. However, the idea of reducing complex ethical concepts like happiness or virtue into quantifiable measure is contentious. Some argue that ethics deals with qualitative aspects of life that cannot be fully captured by quantitative science. And scientific realism, on the other hand, is the view that the world described by science, including entities and phenomena that cannot be directly observed, exists independently of our perceptions or theories. It holds that scientific theories accurately represent the structure of the world, and that unobservable entities like atoms or quarks exist as described by scientific models, even if they cannot be directly detected. In essence, it argues that science gives us a true or approximately true account of the world. In relation to measurement in ethics, scientific realism can be seen as an attempt to apply objective empirical methods to assess moral phenomena. It raises the question of whether ethical concepts like well-being or justice can be measured in the same way that scientific entities are measured through observation and empirical data. Scientific realists might argue that if ethical properties exist in a really objective sense, then they could in theory be measured or quantified, much like physical properties in science. However, this approach faces challenges due to the subjective and often complex nature of ethical values. Now I come to metaethics, the third philosophical discipline that helps us answer questions related to the concept of the good life. It is a branch of philosophy that asks foundational questions about the nature of ethical claims and the possibility of moral knowledge. Metaethics examines the status of moral facts, questioning whether moral statements are objective or subjective, and explores how we come to know what is morally right or wrong. This foundational work is essential for understanding and evaluating ethical systems as well as the nature of moral discourse itself. Metaethics doesn't tell us what specific actions are right or wrong as normative ethics does, but seeks to understand the very language, concepts, and reasoning we use in making ethical claims. So it deals with questions such as, what do we mean when we say something is good, wrong, or just? Are there objective moral facts, or are moral judgments simply expressions of individual or cultural preferences? What is the nature of moral knowledge? Can we know what is morally right or wrong? And if so, how? Key areas of metaethics would include moral realism versus anti-realism, cognitivism versus non-cognitivism, moral absolutism versus moral relativism, moral constructivism, moral subjectivism, and moral epistemology. And let me once again say something about each of these. On moral realism versus anti-realism, we note that moral realism holds that there are objective moral facts that exist independently of human beliefs, feelings, or cultures. According to moral realists, when we say murder is wrong, we are making a claim about an objective fact in the world, just as if we said the sky is blue. Philosophically, moral realism aligns with scientific objectivity, as it suggests that moral facts can be discovered and are not just subjective constructs. However, critics argue that moral facts seem unverifiable in the same way as empirical facts. The difficulty of grounding morality in observable empirical data challenges moral realism's claim to objectivity. Moral anti-realism, on the other hand, denies that there are objective moral facts. Instead, it may argue that moral statements are expressions of emotions, preferences, or social conventions. As an example, a cultural relativist would argue that what is considered right or wrong depends entirely on cultural context and does not reflect universal moral truths. While anti-realism fits with scientific naturalism in terms of emphasizing human-centered explanations. It faces the issue of how to account for widespread moral consensus and moral progress across cultures. Cognitivism versus non-cognitivism. Cognitivism is the view that moral statements can be true or false because they express beliefs that describe the world. According to cognitivists, when we say something is morally wrong, we are making a claim that can be evaluated as true or false. This aligns with scientific reasoning, as it suggests that moral claims are subject to rational evaluation and can be scrutinized for their truth content. However, cognitivism has been criticized for the difficulty in defining moral truths that can be empirically verified in the same way as facts about the physical world. Non-cognitivism, on the other hand, holds that moral statements do not express beliefs that can be true or false. Instead, they express attitudes, preferences, or emotions. According to this view, when we say stealing is wrong, we are not stating a fact, but rather expressing our disapproval of stealing. From a scientific perspective, non-cognitivism aligns with the psychological or sociological accounts of moral expressions. Non-cognitivism struggles with the problem of moral disagreement as it is unclear how conflicting emotional or attitudinal states can be reconciled. Nevertheless, non-cognitivism struggles with the problem of moral disagreement as it's unclear how conflicting emotional or attitudinal states can be reconciled. Now we look at moral absolutism versus moral relativism. Moral absolutism is the view that certain actions are always right or wrong, regardless of context or individual circumstances. Moral absolutists believe that there are universal moral truths that apply to all people at all times. Scientifically, this could be interpreted as an appeal to universal human nature or biological imperatives. But critics argue that moral absolutism fails to account for cultural diversity and the changing nature of moral views over time. Moral relativism, on the other hand, argues that moral judgments are not universally true, but are instead dependent on individual cultural or societal beliefs and contexts. According to relativists, what is right or wrong can vary between different societies or even individuals. From a scientific standpoint, this view is supported by the variability of ethical practices across societies and historical periods. Relativism raises concerns about moral progress and the possibility of judging harmful practices within certain cultures, like slavery, gender inequality. It can also lead to moral paralysis or justification for injustices. Moral constructivism suggests that moral principles are not discovered but constructed through rational procedures. Constructivists often argue that moral truths emerge from the process of collective human reasoning and agreement, and that they are contingent on social practices or shared human experiences. This view aligns with the scientific approaches that emphasize human cognition social interaction, and evolving norms. Constructivism faces challenges regarding how moral norms can be universally applicable if they are merely constructed by human beings. Critics also question whether all rational agents would arrive at the same moral conclusions. And then there is moral subjectivism, which holds that moral judgments are expressions of individual preferences or attitudes. Under subjectivism, statements like killing is wrong are simply expressions of the individual's emotional stance on the issue. This view is supported by psychological and neuroscientific research, which suggests that moral judgments may arise from neural processes related to emotion and personal experience. Subjectivism can lead to moral relativism, where any moral stance is as valid as another. It struggles to account for moral disagreement and the perceived objectivity of certain moral claims, such as human rights. We have also moral epistemology, which explores how we come to know moral facts, if such facts exist. How do we have knowledge of what is right or wrong? Can moral knowledge be derived from reason alone, or is it rooted in emotions, social norms, or divine commands? From a scientific perspective, moral epistemology can draw on evolutionary psychology, cognitive science, and neurobiology to understand how humans develop moral intuitions and reasoning. While the evolutionary explanations can shed light on the origins of moral tendencies, they face the challenge of explaining why moral reasoning often transcends survival instincts, such as altruism or fairness. Furthermore, the question remains whether moral knowledge can be objectively grounded, given the complex interplay of cognitive, emotional, and social factors in moral judgments. In short, meta-ethical inquiries into the nature of ethical statements ask whether ethics is objective or subjective, and whether ethical facts exist independently of human minds. Some philosophers argue that ethical theories are rooted in subjective experiences or cultural norms, while the others believe in objective moral truths. If ethics is subjective, as some forms of relativism claim, then testing these theories scientifically may be futile. If ethics is objective, then perhaps scientific inquiry could validate certain aspects of these theories. Meta-ethical discussions help to clarify whether science can provide a correct answer about the good life, or whether ethical systems are simply frameworks for individual or cultural preferences. From a philosophical scientific perspective, the challenge lies in reconciling subjective human experiences with the desire for objective, universally applicable moral truths. Whether morality is grounded in objective facts, human construction, or emotional expression, these debates continue to play a key role in how we think about ethics and the human nature. So far, so good for the philosophical context. Let us now look at the scientific context. In science, we can find approaches that attempt to measure the well-being, happiness, or flourishing that different ethical systems describe. The scientific areas relevant to testing the ethical systems would include the social sciences, psychology, neuroscience, behavioral economics, and sociology. Psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior, encompassing both human and non-human behavior, conscious and unconscious phenomena, as well as mental processes such as thoughts, feelings, and motives. Positive psychology is a subfield of psychology which focuses on understanding what contributes to well-being, positive relationships, and thriving institutions. It also explores the strengths and the virtues that enable individuals, communities, and organizations to flourish. Pioneered by Martin Seligman, positive psychology investigates aspects of the human experience that promote happiness, life satisfaction, and overall well-being. Researchers in the field examine whether living virtuously, as Aristotle suggested, or pursuing pleasure, as the Cyrenaics and Epicureans proposed, leads to a more fulfilling life. Psychologists try to measure subjective well-being, sometimes written in short as SWB, through self-reported happiness scales, life satisfaction, and emotional well-being. Research might examine how individuals living according to different ethical systems, like hedonistic versus virtue-based, report their overall happiness and life satisfaction.